Hey there knitters, welcome to episode 21 of Knit Talk with a Tech Editor. I'm Megan of the Unapologetic Knitter and I'm a tech editor. And today we are going to be looking at details about becoming a test knitter. As we are deep into July now, all of the patterns that are coming up for Rhinebeck are hitting test knitting territory. So I thought this would be a great time to talk about rules, responsibilities, requirements, and even some etiquette that goes into being a test knitter. So we're going to jump right in and look at what I think of as the kind of hard and fast rules about being a test knitter. One of the very first things that comes to mind is if it's a project with multiple sizes, knit the size that you signed up for. A lot of us get really excited when there's a call for test knits. Of course we are. We're excited about the new design and want to be the first one to make it. And sometimes we don't necessarily read through information about what the finished size of the garment is and get into the actual test knit and realize that we've maybe chosen or have offered to knit a size that is maybe a little too big or maybe a little too small for our bodies, and make the decision to knit a different size. But what that does is kind of scuppers the designer in terms of how they're collecting information. If they're designing a garment that offers, say, 10 sizes, odds are pretty good that they're going to look for 2 test knitters for every size. If you decide to choose to knit a different size without telling them, they are now left without information that they had really planned on having. So knit the size that you sign up for. If you really get stuck, make sure you talk to the designer or the moderator of the test knit and see if there's room for you to move between sizes. Just make sure you keep those lines of communication open. The second thing that I see as sort of paramount when you're becoming a test knitter is keeping the designer's request for privacy or secrecy about the pattern, meet that level, right? If they are asking you to not post any photos of your project, that means not on social media, but it also probably means on Ravelry too. So other designers may have a much more open test knit and they allow you to post sneak peeks or even full images of the project you're working on. Obviously we get excited about what we're test knitting, but just make sure you meet the level of secrecy or privacy that the designer is asking you for. So the next thing to consider is the method of communication that the designer is asking for. As someone who moderates test knits for a couple of my clients, we generally have an email thread that we all work from or a Ravelry thread that we all work from. When test knitters decide to start using other means of communication, whether that's texting, if they happen to know us, emailing outside of the thread, or direct messaging outside of the Ravelry group, it just starts to complicate the source of collection of information. If we start communicating outside the method that the designer has set forth, and there are, say, 20 participants in a test knit, we're suddenly scattering where the designer is going to be looking to collect all of that information at the end of the test knit window, hither and thither. So if they say, here's how we're going to do this test knit, please make sure you respect that. The fourth and final sort of rule that I think is hard and fast is respecting the timeline. It feels like something I shouldn't really need to say, but as summers get busy and vacations happen, it's really important that when you sign up for a test knit, that you understand what your timeline is. So many of us think that, and I'm guilty of this myself, think that when we're knitting on vacation, we're going to have way more time than if we're at home, with our regular work life or family life. But that's rarely the case. So make sure you understand what the deadline of the pattern is before you sign up to test knit. A lot of work goes into planning for the final release, not only as the designer, but any collaborations that may be happening with yarn companies. So it's really important that the designer has the feedback from you as a test knitter by their timeline, or pardon me, by their deadline, so that they know when they're ready to publish They have all the information, they know that everybody was good with the pattern, and they are free to release it without concerns. So the next category that I want to talk about is sort of requirements and responsibilities. And I always think of these as a little bit different than the hard and fast rules because it falls a little bit more in your lap as the test knitter as opposed to in the lap of the designer. The first one is know your abilities. Unless a designer has put out a call for newbie knitters or brand new knitters to help them decide whether their pattern is actually accessible to newer knitters, it's important that you go into a test knit knowing that you can do the things that the designer is going to ask for. Most of them will list skills that you're going to need for the test knit. You can certainly ask for clarification for what those skills might be, but participating in a test knit is generally not the best place for you to decide to try a new skill. The test knitters the designers are looking for their test knitters to be able to understand the flow of a pattern and the construction of whatever they may be making to make sure that everything makes sense as opposed to teaching you how to do something during the test knit. So piggybacking on being confident in your abilities and knowing that you'll be able to do any of the skills required in a pattern is understanding and knowing how to swatch. There can often be a difference for knitting in the round versus knitting flat, knitting in stock or swatching in stockinette versus swatching in pattern. And it's important to not only be able to know the difference and why it matters, but to be able to achieve that difference. And the biggest thing with that can be changing your needle size to make sure you match gauge. Now, no designer out there is going to say you have to match both stitch gauge and pattern and row gauge because that's very rarely the case. So you want to be sure that you understand how to swatch properly and how to read your swatch, but also how to adjust your needle sizes to make sure you match gauge. One of the requirements that tends to get overlooked is tracking the yardage that you use for a project, especially when it comes to garments or any project that has grading required. It's really important that the yardage listed in a pattern reflects the yardage required to actually knit the project. So it's important that you track the actual yardage you use as opposed to guessing. I have seen on occasion where knitters will say, in response to a survey at the end of a test knit, something like, well, I used about 3.5 balls of color A and maybe half a ball of color B. It's really important to accurately track your yardage and yarn usage so that we can make sure that the pattern is listing those quantities properly. The best way to do this is to weigh your skeins before you start using them and when you're done with them. Because just because a ball band on a skein of yarn says it's fingering weight and therefore it's 400 yards per 100 grams, that doesn't mean that the ball that you're holding in your hand is actually 100 grams. It may weigh slightly more or it may weigh slightly less. So you want to make sure you're accurately tracking how many grams or how many yards of each color you're using for the designer. So let's take a look at a little example of how to do this. So if you weigh your skein before you start your project and it's 103 grams, just as an example, and then when you finish your project, let's say you've got 54 grams left. So 103 minus 54 is 49. So that means you've used 49 grams of your skein. So to convert the total number of grams that you used into yards or meters, you're going to divide the amount of yarn that you used, let's say 49 grams, by the total number that the ball band is providing you details for. In this case, it would be 100 grams. So you would divide your used 49 grams by the ball band's 100 grams and you get 0.49. Now you're going to multiply that number, 0.49, by the total yards or the total meters per skein. If your ball band says you should have 400 yards for 100 grams, you're going to multiply 400 by 0.49 and you'll get 196 yards. If you're doing this in meters, it should be around 365.5 meters per 100 grams. So you'll multiply that 365.5 meters by your 0.49 percentage of the skein, and you'll get 179.2 meters. That was a lot of words, but that's just kind of a basic rundown of how to go from grams used into meters or yardage used so you can give the designer the most accurate amount of information. So the next big requirement as a test knitter is for you to actually read the pattern. Of course, you read the pattern as you go through it. There's no other way for you to understand how to make the project that you're working on. But I'm talking about reading the details. So reading every word that is in a paragraph of instructions, or actually reading the abbreviations in the glossary to make sure that you're working a technique correctly. I've always found it to be a little bit more dangerous to assume that we know how to do something rather than actually reading the designer's instructions. You may see an abbreviation that looks familiar, but make sure you read it to make sure that you're working it the right way. The designer may be looking for feedback specifically on that item, so you want to make sure you're doing it the way they've asked. So the last thing that I think falls under sort of the requirements and the responsibilities of a test knitter, it has to do with when the pattern is released, and that is the notion of posting the project appropriately. Every designer is going to have different requests or hopes for your participation in this, but they really are kind of relying on you to not only work through the pattern, potentially find problems or spots of confusion, but they are also relying on you as a means of marketing. So they may ask you to post your finished projects on Ravelry, including any pattern notes for if you added length to a sleeve or shortened the body. They will also likely provide you with social media hashtags. Goodness, that was harder to say than it should have been. They may ask you to tag them using their username or specific hashtags appropriate to that project. And so anytime that you can do that to help them, you are fulfilling your job to the top of being a great test knitter. So now I just want to talk about a couple of sort of unwritten rules of test knitting. These are rules that designers probably don't usually set out in hard form for any of their test knitters, but I think they are rules that are generally meant to be understood or that you can take into consideration to help be a really quality test knitter. The first one has to do with modifications. Test knits are not a place to be doing modifications to a pattern unless a designer calls for it. I'm thinking specifically to do with garments as opposed to accessories. Not all garments are one size fits all body shape of a particular size. So often designers will leave room for modifications for shortening or lengthening the sleeves or shortening or lengthening the body somewhat, but they're not looking for you to do things like modify the method of construction or changing the shape of necklines. They really want you to be knitting the pattern as it is, because not only are you troubleshooting the pattern itself to make sure that it's understandable and there aren't errors in the math, they're also going to be looking at feedback from you about how the garment is constructed and how it fits. The second item that falls under the etiquette category as a test knitter is communicating with the designer in a timely manner. There are some test knitters who are very confident, either they've test knit for a designer multiple times or just know that they'll remember to tell a designer about something. But if you encounter a problem in the pattern as you're test knitting it, it's really important to let the designer or the test knit moderator know that there's a problem right away. It allows a couple of things to happen. One, it allows the designer to look at it and fix it so that it can be distributed to the other participants in case it really is an error. But it's also an opportunity for them to help clarify something if you, as the test knitter, have accidentally misunderstood something. So rather than perhaps grumbling through the test knit, wait until the end and saying there was a problem with X, Y, and Z in the pattern, it's great to give the communication right up front. The odds are good is that the odds are good that it may be an error, and if it is, you're not going to be the only person to experience it. So it's better for the designer to be able to fix it during the test knit so that everybody can benefit from the corrections, rather than multiple people in the test knit maybe not talking about it and being frustrated throughout the rest of the test knit. Why is it so hard to say test knit today? My goodness. So there are obviously no hard and fast guarantees that you will be selected by a designer to become a test knitter for them. However, there are some tips that can help you become a more appealing test knitter for designers, or to help you find people to test knit for. So the first one, if you don't specifically have a designer that you want to test for, but you just want to start test knitting, or maybe do one test knit to see if you even like it, is find the testing pool group on Ravelry. I'll have a link to this in the description below the video, but it's basically a forum where designers are listing patterns that they need test knitters for, and they will often provide you with information of specific sizes that they may need knit. For example, they may have fulfilled several categories of a size of a garment, and they may need someone for a specific size, and that may be you. There is no doubt that test knitting calls get filled very quickly for popular designers. However, there are a couple of things that you can do so that you see their call for test knitters sooner, so that you can hopefully get on the list and get considered. If you are on Facebook and they have a business page on Facebook, you can not only like the business page, but you also want to follow their business page. It's kind of a two-step process. The liking of their business page means that their posts will show up in your feed, but you won't necessarily be notified of it. By clicking the follow button, once you've already liked their page, you should get notifications that they've actually posted something. So it's like an extra little trigger for you to go check out their latest post to see if they've called for test knitting. On Instagram, it is something very similar. So when you go to their profile page on Instagram, you'll want to follow them if you don't already. If they're a popular designer, you likely already do. But there's a second step that you can take. In the upper right-hand corner of their profile, you should see a little bell symbol. And when you click on that bell, you'll be given 4 options that you can choose to get notifications. If you want to make sure you don't miss any of them, click all of them. But I would say making sure that you see their posts and their stories are going to be is the most likely place that they're going to be posting about test knitting calls. If the designer is putting out their testing calls only on Ravelry, there's no way that I'm currently aware of that you can physically get notified or pinged when they make a new post. However, you can navigate to their Ravelry group page and join the group, and then you're just going to want to check it consistently to see if they're putting new posts out for test knitting calls. You can message the designer either through Ravelry, or if they have an email address posted, you could email them and ask if they have an ear burn list. An ear burn simply means that if they do put out a testing call and you are on that list, you will get a notification. But if they don't use an ear burn list, there's really no way to get notified through Ravelry that I'm currently aware of, other than just checking on those posts on a regular basis. So 2 other tips that I have for applying for test knitting. The first one is don't get discouraged. Definitely plan to apply for test knitting opportunities with a popular designer more than once. Those test knitting calls often do go very quickly, and it may be that the size that you would like to test knit for fills up very quickly. So just don't get discouraged. Just because you don't make it one time doesn't mean you won't make it another time. Be persistent, but be kind and patient, and make sure to keep an eye on their testing calls so you might be able to get in on the next one. The second thing is consider having a strong presence on either social media or Ravelry, or both. While I know there are many of us who are not wildly active on social media, It's really good to have strong photos of your work on Ravelry to be considered. If you are on social media, it's good to have quality photos of the projects that you're working on for a designer to look at. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, when the designer is publishing their patterns, they do rely on you somewhat for posting pictures of your finished project to help promote their work. They want to know that you can take nice photos of a finished product to help share and promote their work. Not all of us love being in front of the camera. I know, despite my face being on here every week, I still don't love being in front of a camera, especially for still photos of me wearing clothes. So if you don't feel comfortable always modeling or posing in your clothes, you can always do really nice flat lays where you lay it out on a nice surface. Or if you have a mannequin at home that you can put your garments on, take your photos there. Either way, when a designer is considering you for their test knitting calls, they are going to be looking for your finished projects. So you want to make sure it's either on social media, and if not there, definitely on Ravelry. All right, so this last little section is for my designers who are here watching these videos, who are looking to host test knits of their patterns before they release them. There is no guarantee, especially when you're starting out and trying to get your name out there, that your projects will be seen or that your calls for testing will be seen. I know all about it. It's not always an easy thing to do, but there's lots of people out there who want to do test knits. So I will say that using the resource that I talked about earlier, the test knitting pool group on Ravelry, is a wonderful place to start posting about the projects that you would like to have test knit by other people. So that's a resource not only for people who want to become test knitters, but it's a great resource for designers who want to get test knitters. And then of course, social media. It can be so powerful. It can also be so frustrating. So I will say that if you plan to host a test knit and you are using social media as your main basis of gathering test knitters, and I'm specifically referring to Facebook and Instagram. There are plenty of other platforms. I just don't happen to use them, so I don't know for sure. But my general rule of thumb is post multiple times. It feels a little awkward. At least I always think it feels a little bit awkward to post things multiple times. But with the algorithms set up the way that they are right now, it's really important that your work is out there multiple times. There's kind of a rule of thumb that people need to see your call to action or your product at least 3 times before it sticks in their head and they take action. So post away, get those test knitters. And the other thing to consider when you're posting is engagement. One of the things that Instagram specifically is prioritizing is engagement with your customers, or in this case, your test knitters. So when you post your test knit, make sure you have a call to action right there in your post. It can be something as simple as leave a comment about what size you want to knit, and then send me a DM or send me an email, or however you want them to actually contact you to get on your test knitters list. But make sure you've got a call to action that they can use right there. Leave a comment. It touches your notifications so you know that they've seen your post, but it also allows you to reach back and boost the engagement on your social media posts. If you are looking to put your work out there for test knitters, there's a couple of other things that you can do to help you be more successful in getting quality test knitters. The first one is going to be setting a really clear time frame of when you expect the test knit window to start and what the end of your test knit window is. I have had, or I rather have participated in test knits where the finish date is left a little bit open-ended, and there's no clear date of when the publication or the release of the pattern is. And I find that in those cases, not only myself, but other people participating in the test knit tend to sort of lose direction. If there's a clear goal defined at the start of the test knit window, you're going to have a much more successful test knit for not only you, but for your test knitters. Humans are creatures of habit, and we love working to deadlines, or at least I do. And then the very last thing, if you are a designer calling for test knitters, is please thank your test knitters. A lot of the time, these test knitters are doing this work for free. Of course, they get the enthusiasm of helping you put out a great pattern and being one of the first people to knit a great new design, but they also often volunteer all of their time. Test knitting is very often unpaid, and they, in many cases, also go out and spend money to actually purchase the pattern. So a great way to thank them is to offer them a copy of one of your patterns that's already published, if this is not your first one. But very often, a shout out on social media goes a long way. It makes the test knitters feel like they've been seen and they've been helping you create something that you're really excited about. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion topic. I know this was a lot less technical than we usually get in our conversations, but with Rhinebeck around the corner, I thought it would be a really good discussion topic to talk about not only how to become a test knitter, but how to become a good test knitter for your designers. If you enjoyed this week's topic or learned anything that you didn't know, I would love for you to hit the like button on this video and subscribe to my channel. It lets me know that you think I'm doing a good job, and also lets the YouTube algorithms know that I'm doing a good job, so we can get more knitters in front of these videos and get them on their knitting journey. So next week, we're going to have another more technical episode. We're going to take a look at how to measure our bodies for drop shoulder style sweaters and plan for sleeves that fit. Thank you so much for being here this week, my friends. As always, I enjoy spending time with you. I hope you have a lovely rest of your week, and happy knitting.